Anybody signed up for public comment?
I have not received anything at the start of this meeting.
Okay. Have we got anybody on the call who'd like to offer comment?
There, Mr. Rogers, there is. John Hardy did just type in chat and ask if he would be allowed to speak.
I think that's fine, Mr. Hardy. I think you're familiar with the protocol, 3 minutes. So with that being the case, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Rogers. I just wanted to share with the Services Authority and everyone, while oftentimes it is not pleasurable to attend the meetings and you know, we have to take a stand against the things that are happening in our community nearby as a result of the landfill and the problems you know, involved in that. I did want to offer my condolences to the Region 2000 Services Authority, in particular the Central Virginia Planning District, for the loss of Susan Cook, which I know was a valued member of your team and had recently retired. And I know her passing was a shock to me. So I'm sure it was to you, and she was always a delight and a pleasure to deal with in some of the, you know, times that weren't always so pleasant. So she was a consummate professional, and I just wanted to send out my heartfelt condolences to your staff for her loss.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hardy. I think those sentiments are probably shared by everybody, but appreciate you sharing them with the group. Certainly sorry to hear of Susan's passing. All right, is there anyone else who would like to offer comment? All right, seeing none, hearing none, we'll go ahead and move on. I guess our next order of business is the approval of the January 27 meeting minutes. What's the pleasure of the authority board on those?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the minutes as presented.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you both. All right, there's a motion and a second. If there's no other discussion, all those in favor of approving the minutes as presented, let's do a roll call since it's hard to tell. Mr. Carter?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Ms. Hart?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Thank you all. That moves us to the financial report. Rosalie, the floor is yours.
Okay. I'll start with Schedule 1, and our situation hasn't changed that much from our January meeting. Tonnage is up overall for the year, and so I'm on Schedule 1. Our market rate, our contract and market rate tonnage revenue is at $2,039,000. I'm sorry, it's at $2,773,000. And this is causing our cost of service to be $1.06 less than our budget of $30.25. It's at $29.19. On the Schedule 2, I guess the expenses, and this is down in the middle of the shaded area, of $2,388,000 is just slightly above plan. I will point out that one of the drivers of that is we had some heavy equipment repair. We had our machinist was out for a long period of time with an illness, and so we had to have contract work done. I guess those are the highlights. If there is anything that anyone wants to go into specifically for the actuals through January.
Anybody on the authority have any questions for Rosalie?
So I didn't do the math, but Rosalie, if you projected out revenues year to date through June 30th, what would that be in relation to approved expenditures?
I haven't done the math either, so I can't answer that question. We really haven't done a projection through the end of the year. You know, the question is, will tonnage remain the same? Will expenses remain the same? And I don't know. Sorry. You know, hopefully, I mean, these are through January. Hopefully by our next meeting, you know, I guess hopefully we'll have everything through March by then, and it'll be a better barometer. So.
Any other questions for Rosalie? Okay, I think that's just an update. You didn't need any action from the authority on that, correct?
No, sir.
All right, so that'll move us to the budget summary, which is to you, Mr. Gibson.
All right. On the financial report spreadsheets, we also have a column for the FY22 preliminary budget. And here's a summary as follows. We have 192,886 tons of projected revenue tonnage for next year. We did not increase this or make adjustments to this due to the uncertainty of the past year and also moving forward. Revenue is a 2.05 increase at $7,199,229. Operating expense is a 2.4% increase at $6,168,683. And total expenses matches revenue at $7,199,229. The disposal cost of service will be $31 per ton. That's a 75 increase over FY21. This is also shows a reduction in 25 cents from our January budget presentation. Our proposed tipping fee would be for our members at $31 per ton. Again, a 75-cent increase. And the market rate is $41 a ton, a 75 increase. We will require a public hearing before the budget is adopted because of the proposed increase in the market rate tipping fee. I also included some data of historical tipping fees. And as you can see, we haven't increased our tipping fee for several years, just to kind of give you a perspective of where we are with tipping fees. We have included a 3% employee merit-based increase. We believe this increase is justified to help continue the good employee retention rate we've experienced over the last several years, as well as recognize the excellent performance of our employees who all contribute to the efficiencies of our landfill operation. This keeps your member rate one of the lowest solid waste disposal rates in Virginia. I do understand that some of you may be considering a 5% increase this year. We would certainly like the board to consider giving our employees a 5% increase next year. If you decide to give your employees a 5% increase, this would add about a little over $20,000 to our proposed budget and approximately 11-cent additional increase to our cost of service. We could certainly make that up with reducing one or two of our reserve contributions to one or two of our reserve funds. The airspace reserve in the proposed budget is $1,219,761. I do have some notes. Excuse me. We do have a landfill capacity analysis underway. We just recently did an aerial survey. This study will determine more accurately the original volume of the member use agreements. When the original volume that's in our member use agreement will be reached, and at that point, the distribution calculation of the excess revenue will cease. Moving forward from that point, the adopted financial policy states that the authority would keep 25% of the excess revenue or airspace reserve, and Campbell County would receive 75% as the host community. Current projection for reaching this original volume is sometime within the next 3 to 6 months. The current total remaining capacity is projected to be fulfilled by 2030. Again, this additional capacity was realized by the lateral expansion permitting and the final phase 5 cell. The process of financing the final phase 5 cell should begin this spring. Preliminary engineering and surveying have already begun on the phase 5 construction project. Our recommended action is to authorize the advertisement of a public hearing on the proposed market rate increase of 75 cents to $41 per ton prior to the April 28, 2021 meeting. And that's all I have.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Gibson. A lot in there. I suspect we'll have some discussion on that. So discussion from authority members.
So I have a question or two. Have y'all looked analysis-wise at previous fiscal years to determine, sort of relates to my previous question, what, if any, year-ending balances the authority has realized revenues above expenditures, so that they could help you with an estimate based on this year's numbers with some plus or minus consideration, so that potentially this request to increase the tipping fee would be mitigated by year-end savings that could be used for one-time expenses. I mean, that's how we approach it, instead of just asking to increase the tipping fees and, without any consideration of revenues being greater historically than expenditures, and there's no need to increase the tipping fee.
Well, historically, we have placed any additional revenues under the cost of service into our operational reserve. We do have a financial policy that requires us to have about 3 months of operational expenses in that reserve account. So, and I'm not sure what the balance of that is at this point. It's Rosalie, you can help me out there.
It's in the about $860,000 range, I think. So
So what's 3 months?
And I'd have to add it up, but it's the personnel costs, 106. Well, when you go on to the next question and I will find the answer for you instead of making y'all wait.
Okay, we'll wait on that answer. I wonder, what would our revenue tonnage projection have to be to mitigate the rate increase? So we've level funded our tonnage projection, which is conservative, and I appreciate staff's approach there, but I'm curious, what tonnage would we have to receive to live within the current tipping fee, to sort of restate the question?
Well, for each, I'm gonna probably get this wrong, but,
Don't give me it if it's wrong.
Oh, I'm
Hang on.
sorry.
Over.
it's the, I have to see it. I can't pull numbers out of my head. Is it 25 cents for each?
$30.25, right?
No, the tonnage would have to, I'm gonna have to get it for you. I can't remember it off the top of my head. It's the simple calculations, but it's like, I have to look it up. But don't ask me
Okay.
numbers on this
But-
side. The one question I will come back to is the, you asked about.
You need about 4,000 additional tons, I think, Frank, something in that ballpark.
Right. So if we project another 4,000 in tonnage, we can keep our tipping fees the same.
That wouldn't potentially mitigate the increase in the operational costs for next year. I mean, I did that real quick, but that's what it looks like to me, about 4,000 more tons. I mean, I'm hoping that we reduce our tonnage next year, but we're already projecting 13,000 tons of waste disposal at the authority, which is 3,000 or 4,000 more than were estimated by the authority. You know, it's been a weird year for everybody, but, you know, if that trend continued, we'd contribute the amount necessary to mitigate the increase in the expenditure proposal, just in
Well,
Nelson County alone.
What we can do is, we're not voting on the budget today, but what we can do is present an option at the next meeting to show you what we would need to, what the tonnage increase, projected increase would need to be to bring the tipping fee back to a $0 increase. But
Yeah,
we
or
would
what it
still-
could be to lower the tipping fee.
Well, what we would still need authorization to go ahead and at least advertise for a public hearing to increase the tipping fee, whether or not we decide to increase it or not. Because if we do decide to increase it, even a quarter or so after our next meeting, we would still need to have the public hearing for the market rate tipping fee increase.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, ma'am.
didn't we talk about a budget work session to work some of this out prior to this meeting, having one scheduled? It's in the minutes that we were going to schedule one February or March.
Excuse me, this is Gary. This is the budget work session that we talked about. Our regular meeting is not till April. So
Okay. so
this is our
we need-
intention.
Okay, there were just a lot of items on there. I didn't realize that it was specific to the budget. So we shouldn't be acting on the other items then? Is that what you're saying?
Oh, no, while we're together, let's take care of all this business.
Well, if I may, that quick calculation I did was just based on member tonnage, not commercial as well. So hopefully it wouldn't be all member tonnage that fixed the problem, so to say. I don't know. I don't mean to be critical, but I wish y'all would do a little bit more analysis of trends and year-end numbers and stuff like that, instead of just giving us the numbers and saying we need to increase the tipping fee. Sorry, I'm not well taken by that.
Yeah, I
Do we-
think,
Insurance estimates also? I think that was supposed to come back.
I'm sorry, Susan, I think I inadvertently spoke over you there. Could you repeat that question?
That's okay. I was just asking about have we got definitive insurance numbers on what that costs, whether it be an increase? I think it was mentioned it could be a 3%, but some localities, we even had a reduction of 1% on ours.
We did have a reduction.
Okay. And how
Of
much is that?
1%.
It was 1%.
1%? Okay.
Yes.
And the actual number, you know, based on our current employee base and, you know, what they're getting now and such is in the budget based off of our actuals. So.
Yeah, I mean, not that we're perfect over here in Nelson County, but the strategy we've used throughout my tenure here is cost containment and mitigate any requirement for tax increases through analysis and strategies. That's worked pretty well for us. I would like for y'all to maybe, if need be, spend more time looking at this stuff. I don't know.
Well, I would like to say that we haven't had a tipping fee increase in 4 years. So we do try to do our best to contain cost and keep our expenses.
We haven't
low.
had a tax increase from over 10 years in Nelson County. So there we go. Maybe over 15 years.
And
So
what, excuse me, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. Go
You're
ahead.
fine, Susan, go ahead.
Okay. I was just wondering, there was the request also for the 5% pay increase, and that hasn't been added into this. So would that change that number as well?
Well,
as far as-
a 3% increase is included. An additional 2% for our employees would add about 11 cents to the cost of service, or a little over $20,000.
And so we just talked about a 1% reduction in healthcare. That savings has already been incorporated in to the expenditure proposal.
It's on
Okay.
Schedule 3.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And so I guess my question to staff would be, if the authority board was not friendly this year to a rate increase, what would your strategy be to remain at the current funding level? What do we lose if we don't increase rates?
Of course, we would take a look at the tonnage projections. I'm just always try to be a little conservative on that end because of especially this past year, the uncertainty. We certainly weren't expecting such an increase in tonnage over the last 12 months. Which is the main reason we didn't project an increase this coming year, but we could certainly take another look at that. And then we could take a look at some of our reserve accounts. Our line items are pretty tight because we've tried to keep our tipping fee low over the last 5 to 10, 15 years. It's one of the lowest in the state for an authority, a public authority. So we could look at some of our contributions to our reserve funds.
Clark, the one reserve fund that is, I'm sorry, Clark, the one reserve fund that is getting the biggest hit is the equipment replacement reserve. And
I wouldn't recommend.
And that list, and that, I mean, that's where the majority of it is coming from. In your handout, there is a preliminary FY22 schedule of capital equipment.
Yeah, we've got a
replacement. So
yeah,
I mean, that's where the costs are.
Yeah, we've got a compactor replacement in the budget. And if you remember, a few years ago, we instead of purchasing a brand new compactor at about $1 million is what a compactor costs, we went with a remanufactured compactor at less than half of that cost, and we've been very pleased with the service out of that unit. So we are again proposing to purchase a remanufactured compactor for half or less than half the cost of a compactor, but it's still a very, very large expense.
What's the remote control slope mower? What's that all about?
We have some very, very steep, large slopes on our closed landfill. right now, and we are required by the DEQ to keep the slopes mowed, and we just feel like it's just getting increasingly dangerous to put one of our employees on those slopes pulling a bush hog on a tractor. So using safer and technology that's available now, we were proposing to use a remote controlled slope mower where we don't have to put a man on the piece of equipment on those slopes.
Is it a large piece of equipment?
About the size of a vehicle.
Hmm.
You see them on 460 sometimes. VDOT uses them on 460 right around Liberty University.
Yeah, I've never seen one. Hmm.
So if I may, staff has proposed a budget that recommends a rate increase. And if the authority was not friendly to a rate increase this year, what I heard as our balancing actions would be to increase the tonnage estimate so that we took our revenue number up and then reduce our transfers to reserve accounts. Did I capture your answer correctly?
That's correct. And we would take a look at where we stand with our operational reserve. We might be at a point where we've reached the 3-month total that we
Well, and I think it ties back to Mr. Carter's point, which is if you're
Rosalie's sighing here, so
I mean, we have a projection out to the end of the life of the landfill, and within that are the closure costs and those kinds of things. And what we had done in that is any additional monies for that come into the operating reserves when it turns to the 25%, for example, 25/75, that money goes the next year into closure. My concern is adequately funding closure by the end of the life, since it ends in 2030. I mean, we do have a projection out through the end of the life of the landfill. For things like equipment, for example, we don't want to be buying a compactor in year 2028, for example. So we want to make sure that our equipment is done in its useful life by the end of the landfill, or sell it. But so I just caution.
I appreciate that, because I think it's important to focus on closure as well. But I guess where I'm going is I don't want to presuppose the outcome of today's meeting around a rate. But if we're not going to increase it, I want to understand what we're foregoing if we don't increase it. And I think, Steve, it probably circles back to your point. If one of the balancing strategies is to reduce our transfer to a fund reserve, you might try to refill that with a year-end balance if we had some understanding of our history about having $50,000, $75,000 left at the end of each year, and we're already over and above our operating target. So there might be ways to get there with a little more data. Also, we'll take this opportunity. I don't like to miss a meeting without talking out of both sides of my mouth. We're a lot of times we're encouraging our own communities to face revenue realities incrementally instead of being faced with a big hit when you put this stuff off for a couple of years. So I'm sensitive to not putting it off, and ending up with a $5 increase. So I'm trying to balance the two priorities.
One other item that we don't budget for is the sale of a surplus equipment, and we will, when we replace the compactor next fiscal year, we will have an old compactor, and we always auction those old pieces of equipment off. And in some cases, especially the compactors, we could get $75,000, $100,000 for that old equipment.
those funds would always roll back into the equipment replacement.
Typically, we
Reserve.
always roll those back into equipment replacement, but we've never shown that as a budget line item or a contribution to our reserve.
Well, it seems to me, if I understood the presentation, we were willing to contemplate reducing transfers to reserves to offset the additional 2% on the raise, right? So that suggests to me that staff was comfortable with making some reductions in transfer to reserves, or did I misunderstand that strategy?
Yeah, that was correct. If we wanted to avoid another 11-cent increase with 5%, again, it's just a little over $20,000. So, we could certainly find that somewhere in a reserve contribution. But again, like Rosa said, it's just, again, the closure reserve is our best estimate at this point for something that will happen 10 years and then 30 years down the line for post-closure. So, it is our best guess, our best estimate.
Well, if I may, if I understood that correctly, I'm not in favor of using what we call non-recurring revenue over here for recurring expenses. So if the plan is to use revenues that aren't going to come back annually to cover costs that are going to come back each year, I'm completely opposed to that.
Yeah, which is why we don't budget the sale of old equipment into the budget, because we really don't know what it's going to be.
Yeah, I thought you were saying that there would be some use of year-ending balance to fund the compensation increase. That's incorrect. That's a question.
I didn't understand your question.
So if there's money left over at the end of this year, there's not a plan to use that money for the recommended salary increases for next year. Is that correct?
Well, that's not what I was proposing. That money has typically been rolled into an operational reserve account. Again, because we don't know what that's going to be either. But what
that's all I need to know.
Okay.
And the question was asked a while back ago, what was our quarterly operating expenses? And it's 917,000. And I said we had a balance off the top of my head, 850 some. That might not be correct, but it's in that ballpark.
Frank, I have another question, if I may.
Yes, sir, please.
So, sorry, here I go. Clark, on that airspace reserve note you wrote, what is the source of the original calculation of the airspace?
When we formed the authority and started working on the authority documents and studies and engineering analysis and financial analysis back, I believe, way back to 2005, one of the things we did prior to hammering out that member use agreement was to figure out how much airspace that the Campbell County landfill had remaining and the Lynchburg landfill had remaining.
Where is it documented? That's my question.
It's documented in the studies that are on our website.
Okay, so let me interrupt you again.
Studies.
Is it in the true up documents for Lynchburg and Campbell?
And then when we were about 3 or 4 years into the operation, we realized that
I remember that.
Yeah, there was an error in there, and we did a true.
Answer my question, please. is the calculation of the airspace reserve in the true up documents that Beck did way back when?
Yes, and with the assistance of Draper Aden and the surveys that we had at the time that I believe were done by another engineering firm.
So here's my next question. If that's correct and the airspace, I know it's there, I've looked at it, it's documented in those true up documents and there's a value associated with those amounts. Were those amounts paid to Lynchburg and Campbell?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
If the airspace was documented in the true up reports for Lynchburg and Campbell, no matter how it's shown, and those numbers are shown in those reports, and there is an associated value financially, a dollar amount associated with each value for each locality, were those monies paid to Lynchburg and Campbell?
Not necessarily the financial
Wait, no.
track.
Yes or no?
Mr. Carter, I think, I
No.
appreciate the direct line of questioning, but I want to make sure we have, a fair dialogue here. I don't know that this can be distilled down to a yes or no without the context. There's obviously some disagreement on the authority about the question of excess revenues. I would exercise some caution around digging too deeply into that, given it's, it's with lawyers, I suppose. So I wonder respectfully sort of where the line of question is going.
Well, it speaks right to the lawsuit that y'all filed. Okay, I'll get off that, but that's my question, which you really didn't answer. Maybe it's not an answer. Sorry.
That's fine. So shall we direct our attention back to the budget? Because I think we're in the midst of a lot of good discussion there around revenue projections, rate increases, tonnage assumptions, and compensation changes. So what is the pleasure of the authority with regard to those matters?
Well,
Wait, I'd like to interject something else if I may. I want what I just said to be in the minutes. Do not omit that from the minutes.
I think staff can capture that in the minutes. I don't believe we're in the habit of doing verbatim, but please pay particular attention to Mr. Carter's points and make sure they're accurately reflected, please.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask just one question about what is the cost of the aerial survey? Does anyone have that? Or the analysis that's being performed?
yes, I've got a contract with Draper Aden who did the survey. I don't have that right in front of me now, but I could certainly get that to you.
And I may have missed the point. And why is that being performed?
Well, from time to time, we have to perform an aerial survey to reconcile with our field check, our field surveying equipment that we use. So from time to time, we do a aerial survey to calculate the topography of the current state of the landfill. And we compare that to the the contours on our permit to come up with the volumes of, and we use a calculation to take into account the compaction rates that we're getting. And then we could use that to project those dates like you hear, like 2030, and when we're going to reach the original volume capacity in the member use agreement. So that was one reason for this survey. The other reason was to prepare for our construction documents for phase 5 construction. We need to have some base surveying done so that the engineers can begin their construction documents for phase 5, the next and final cell.
Susan, I
Okay.
have a few numbers for you. Actually from Draper 8, and I have an invoice here. It looks like 125 acres aerial and ground surveying is going to come to a total of 27,600. And to date, we have only been partially billed for what they've completed so far of about $4,200.
Okay,
And
thank
yeah, that is also, we passed the reimbursement resolution at our last meeting for the Phase 5 construction project that we'll be talking about the next couple meetings, the financing for the next couple meetings. So that project is eligible to be reimbursed through the future bond for Phase 5 because of the surveying and engineering is required for for that project.
Okay. Thank you, Clark.
So I believe the one question pressing our timeline has to do with whether or not we're going to conduct a public hearing to consider a rate increase. Is that fair?
That's fair.
And so I think that's a critical question to give staff some direction on so that we can adopt a budget in time. So maybe we focus on that piece for the time being and see if I can get a sense from authority members about what your appetite is for that. I know our last meeting, we talked about you can always advertise the increase and then not do it. It gives you time to contemplate it and get some more analysis versus if we're not really going to consider it or can't afford it, maybe we don't even want to go through that step. So what's y'all's pleasure on that?
Well, I'll speak for Lynchburg. We do not want an increase in our tipping fee.
Thank you, Gaynell. That was succinct and abundantly clear. We appreciate that. We don't get that a lot in these meetings. Steve, Susan, where are you guys on it?
I concur with Gaynell's comments that we're not in favor of an increase in tipping fees either.
All right, Steve, I'd ask your opinion, but as we know all too well, two on any side sort of settle the question. So that would seem to me, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I didn't realize I was muted. I'm in favor of no increase.
Okay, so that being the case, staff, there appears to me to be no need for a public hearing to contemplate a rate increase. And so I look back to the authority to see what other, I sort of share Steve's concern, for some additional analysis and context for some of these proposals. Our other open questions seem to me to be the 5% consideration. Is that correct?
Yes.
And would you still
Mr.
recommend?
Chairman, I'm
Go
sorry,
ahead.
excuse me. Again, I don't think you need to decide that today. We can give you some options at the April meeting when we will ask you to approve a budget. And staff can look at, see what kind of monies and options we could come up with in order to fund the various things we think we need funded without a rate increase.
Oh man, sorry. So I'm not necessarily not supportive or unsupportive of the 5%, but it's curious to me that if you proposed an increase in your rates and you need the extra money, and now we're saying you're not going to get it, we'd be curious to see where you come up with the extra money for to cover both your operations and 2% more. Yeah, I'll be interested to see that.
And it seems to me, based on our discussion to date, that the answer to that will be increase in tonnage projections to bring in a little bit of money and a reduction in some of these transfer to reserve accounts, right? So I'll be curious I do think it would be helpful to understand Steve's very first question of plus some confidence or lack of confidence in year-over-year, year-end accounts and amounts. So those would be the three.
I mean, it doesn't even need to be said, of course, but Clark, you say each year you're conservative with those tonnage estimates, but I would be careful because I wouldn't overestimate to make sure you get 2% more. That's for sure. Yeah, I may not like that next year.
Well, that's right. And I think that we probably need to be concerned about commercial tonnage. You know, I don't think it's all going to be member tonnage. What's going on with commercial tonnage? We're going to have to be realistic about what we think will really happen with tonnage over the next 12 months. And if we can afford to have the conversation, I'm happy to have it. And if we can't, we'll have a factual basis for why we couldn't do what we may have all collectively wanted to, but just couldn't make it happen with the budget. Okay, so Gary, I think, well, let me go to the authority. Is everybody comfortable with that? Sort of putting it back to staff to say, in the absence of a rate increase, please revisit your budget projections and bring us something for consideration at our April meeting?
Yes.
Susan, does that adequately meet sort of your expectations for a budget work session, or were there other pieces, parts that you were hoping to get a little more information on?
No, if I have questions, I can email those out, maybe as a type of reply all.
Okay, yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so is there any other discussion on the budget? Okay, great. I appreciate everybody's work on that. So let's move to the gas to energy project, please.
Okay, staff, as you know, advertised for a landfill gas to energy project probably a little over a year ago, and we received 2 proposals. We had evaluated those proposals and selected Ingenco as the company that we wanted to look into creating this project. And the COVID crisis hit, so that project got put on hold for about 5 or 6 months, and then we last fall we started discussing the project again with Ingenco, and we began negotiating the contract terms with Ingenco on this project. Staff has worked diligently and very hard the last few months with Ingenco to come up with what we think is a fair and very solid landfill gas to energy contract. This contract, not this fiscal year, but FY23, we would start realizing a minimum of $100,000 a year of additional revenue from this project. And that could very well be twice that or even more based on the energy sales that Ingenco will realize from this very beneficial project. Bill Hefty, Gary, myself, and Bob Dick, and Brandon from SCS have all worked very hard with Thomas Fabry, who's on the call on the Zoom meeting as well. Have all worked very hard to come up with this contract, and we would like for the board to consider approving this contract today. And Bob Dick is here to go over some highlights of what's in the contract. I'll turn it over to Bob right now.
Thanks, Clark. Can you hear me okay?
I believe so.
Yes, we can hear you.
If it's okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Gary or Clark, can you confirm for me that you're seeing my screen in presentation mode?
I am.
Good. Looks good.
All right. Well, board members, you know that I'm Bob Dick with SCS and serve as a consultant on landfill gas and air quality issues for the Region 2000 Services Authority. And so in your board packet was a summary page that gave some of this information, some of the highlights in a summarized bullet form. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail. I would definitely welcome any questions, concerns, or interrupt me at any time if you need clarification on it. Also in your board package was an actual draft of the proposed landfill gas purchase agreement. And so Clark hit on this timeline, November 2019, a landfill gas to energy beneficial use project, RFP, request for proposal, was issued, and the authority in December of 2019 received 2 proposals, one of which was from Ingenco Wholesale Power. And interviews were conducted with both potential proposers for the landfill gas to energy developers in February of 2020. And in May, the authority's selection committee recommended that the authority pursue negotiating a contract with Ingenco. Ingenco took an opportunity from May through August to assess the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on their business and energy markets in general. In November 2020 was when the initial exchange, the authority transmitted a draft landfill gas to energy purchase agreement that included a component of that document is a site license agreement. And over the past several months, there have been numerous iterations of contract negotiations, as you would expect with a contract of this magnitude or complexity of an issue. The agreement that I'll be taking you through today has 16 articles that outline the terms and conditions of the agreement, or sometimes I might call it the contract. It's about 50 pages. Also, it includes an Exhibit A that is a description of the landfill and a drawing. Exhibit B is a drawing of the point of acceptance where the landfill gas will transfer from the authority to Ingenco Wholesale Power. And Exhibit C, is landfill gas standards, specifications on the quality of the gas as well as pressure. And Exhibit D is a site license agreement. Before I jump into some of the highlights of it, just some big picture concepts or themes of this arrangement. Number one, recognize that the authority is transferring the rights to the landfill gas to Ingenco as the energy developer. Sometimes in the context of the language used, we reference it as a landfill gas conveyance or transfer. Also, sometimes it's called the LFG, landfill gas purchase, but as you'll see here, there's not really a stipulated price for an actual quantity of gas. I'll get into this a little bit more in a minute here. It's a revenue sharing arrangement. The energy project that Ingenco has proposed is electrical generation or any other derivative energy product. So Ingenco's business model, and Tom Fabry is with us today and would acknowledge this, is primarily electrical power generation using 350 kilowatt dual fueled engine gensets. And these are refurbished, you see them all the time, Detroit diesel tractor trailer engines that have been refurbished using their proprietary specifications to accept both liquid fuel, such as number 2 fuel oil, we call it diesel, or and landfill gas. And so their proposal is to put in an initial 6 megawatt power plant, but the contract is definitely acknowledges that there can be other derivative energy products from that gas. Another highlight or concept, big picture theme, and some of my statements here are to assist you in distinguishing key differences between this proposed contract at Livestock Road and the contract that you're familiar with at Concord Turnpike that the authority inherited from the city of Lynchburg's project, which was over 20 years ago. So one reason I highlighted this fact is, unlike Concord Turnpike, at Livestock Road in this proposed contract, the authority maintains ownership and operation of the landfill gas collection and control system, and therefore has the ability and the responsibility to determine operational parameters for other objectives such as odor control, environmental regulatory compliance, but obviously also to provide fuel for the Ingenco's power plant or other activities to derive energy from the landfill gas. Ingenco owns and is responsible for all elements of the design, permitting, construction, operation of the landfill gas to energy project. I should have probably put it in there also, and decommissioning, dismantling, or removal of the infrastructure at the end of the project as well.
Bob, I'm sorry to interrupt, but can I ask a quick question on that, or just make a quick clarification? We've talked in the past about this, and I just want to continue to make clear that this sort of use will require a special use permit from the Campbell County Board of Supervisors. And so that is all put on the Ingenco folks to coordinate that, correct?
It is. That is a correct statement and is reflected in the contract language. The only thing I would put out is there is a clause on mutual assistance, meaning that it's expected that the authority as a partner in the project would do, whatever is deemed appropriate to assist Ingenco. That might be to supply drawings, but the Ingenco definitely maintains responsibility for securing the permits.
Thank you.
It's not
Frank
really.
is the
Sorry, go ahead.
and Frank is the property owner. We may have to actually sign the permit application.
That's fine. I understand those mechanics. I just continue to want to be abundantly clear so nobody is surprised when this requires a special use permit.
Yes,
So-
this is Tom Fabry with Ingenco. We do understand that.
Thank you.
It is Tom. Oh my God, it's funny.
It's funny. So I have a question. So the agreement, I mean, it's just a minor point, doesn't really make reference to the special use permit, right, with Campbell, or does it? Or is it just say the Ingenco and the authority have to get whatever permits, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
I think it's
Just says-
contract section 1.3, which just says Ingenco has to secure all land permits, but I'll leave it to Bob and Tom and Bill to answer that.
They have a year to get all the permits, year or 18 months, can't remember for sure, and they can terminate the contract if they don't get them. But the responsibility is on them to get the permits, whatever permits there are, federal permits, state permits, local permits.
But it doesn't specifically say.
In response to Mr. Carter's question, I do not believe we use terminology as detailed as Campbell County special use permit. It's handled a little bit more generically.
Yeah.
There's other permits like an interconnect permit with the utility. In addition, there might be industrial wastewater discharge permits. So it's not specific to just zoning and land use.
Yeah, sorry, my question was sort of innocuous. I just wanted to state that it really doesn't say special use permit. It's more, as Bob said, generic language or whatever. Yeah, sort of catch-all.
Yep. The next bullet point is to make authority members aware that Ingenco is somewhat unique in the landfill gas to energy power production space, in that their engines do have the ability to utilize other fuels or fuels other than landfill gas. That is helpful because, one, in Virginia, it has set a precedent in that Ingenco gets their own air permit from the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality and is not incorporated into the authority's existing air quality permits. It also means that they can actually derive revenues from electricity production, capacity, sale of renewable energy credits without necessarily needing the landfill gas. Having said that, it's clear that Ingenco's existing projects throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia, North Carolina, Maryland, Pennsylvania, rely on the landfill gas to provide approximately 98% of the BTU content that the engines need. But as such, you'll see that there are provisions in the contract where Ingenco will be storing liquid fuel for their power plant, and that's anticipated. And last, or one of the last primary concepts or themes is there's a lease of real estate that was mentioned in your board package summary, approximately 2 acres. I mentioned this, just the concept of this project is aligned and structured to be a win-win partnership for both the authority and the third-party landfill gas to energy developer. It's a revenue sharing arrangement. So instead of just a gas sales or a purchase of a certain quantity of gas, or even a heat rate like the BTU value of the gas, the revenues that Ingenco will produce are derived from various activities. They sell power, that's electricity sales. They put electrons on the actual grid that are distributed to local homes and businesses for electricity. There's also a thing called capacity, meaning they can derive revenue from just existing, having the capability to power up and sometimes getting called up by the utility. You're familiar with that as a dispatchable plant, oftentimes have arrangements with the utility on peak power. This is not a peak power project, it's a base load project, but there are potential to make money from just existing, even if no electrons are actually going on the grid. They also can monetize environmental attributes. And in the world of power production, those environmental attributes are primarily called renewable energy credits. And so Ingenco derives some payment for the aspect that this is green power. So as you folks know, when you put an electron on the grid, it's no such thing as brown power or green power. It's just an electron. It can light a light bulb or power an engine. But the idea that it's green power allows them to monetize the tag from that electron as a renewable energy credit. And then a fourth commodity is what sometimes is in slang terms is carbon credits. They're greenhouse gas emission reduction credits, the ability to sell those depending on a lot of things, different voluntary or mandatory platforms for carbon reductions, and also the status of the landfill as having a mandate to control its emissions or not can affect that. That gives you the primary concepts and themes. I'm just going to go through some of the agreement points in Articles 1 and 2. Please note in Article 1 that the authority withholds some landfill gas to enable them to accomplish space heating. That hasn't been installed yet, but the authority recognizes that their gas can do useful work by heating the shop building And so there's a provision for up to 50 CFM of the landfill gas to be withheld. There's also some contingencies. One of those was that Ingenco has to secure the permits. In Article 2 is really where the money piece, the payment that the authority will derive from this partnership with Ingenco. Payments start upon the commercial date of operations or no later than 18 months after execution of this contract. The gross revenues that the plant derives through those various activities that I mentioned are going to be shared with the authority at a percentage of 10% of the gross revenues, and that's evaluated or assessed on a daily basis. It's paid on a monthly basis. So every month, Ingenco has the ability to essentially submit payment and a backup information documenting where and how they derived revenues from that, and then provide the authority a 10% payment of that. One caveat to that is that any revenues, net revenues associated with greenhouse gas emission reduction credits, again, sometimes referred to as carbon credits, the authority will maintain 50% of the net revenues should that come to pass. There is a guaranteed minimum payment. I've been thinking of it almost like a licensing fee for Ingenco's privilege of entering into this agreement and partnership with the authority of $8,333.33 a month. That's $100,000 a year of a minimum payment. All parties certainly hope that the 10% of gross revenues exceed that minimum payment. But under no circumstances, according to this agreement, will the payment from Ingenco to the authority be less than that amount on a per month basis, which again starts 18 months after the contract date, regardless of when the power plant starts, unless it starts earlier than 18 months, then it would commence with that operational date. There is an exception to the 10% of gross revenues, and that is if the landfill gas that the authority transfers to Ingenco for purposes of producing the electricity or their energy-derived product, if it doesn't meet the lenient specifications outlined in Exhibit C. I'll talk about that later. And then just for reference, this is just as an example, Ingenco's proposal projected that in 2023, the annual payments were believed to be about $132,000. That was based on their best guess estimate of future energy pricing and the authority's best guesstimate of how much gas could be available on average during that year. I thought that would just be interesting. I anticipated that you may have a question of, well, what do you think we're actually going to get? And so while we don't know, perhaps Ingenco can't absolutely control things like REC pricing, capacity, payments that they might get from a power purchase agreement. That gives some context to that question in case you had it. Articles 3 and 4. Article 3 is very basic. It's just a point of acceptance. It defines a physical point in the piping arrangement at the authority's blower flare station where the gas will transfer. Article 4 talked about the seller's facilities, and I highlight again that the authority's facilities include the gas collection control system. Purchasers' facilities are the entire gas to energy beneficial use project, whatever infrastructure that entails. There's provisions specifically dealing with the metering, the power plant facilities, the fuel oil tanks, water supply piping, and wastewater discharge piping, more along those lines. Article 4 also is the first place that it references the site lease agreement in Exhibit D. It talks about the gas specifications and refers to Exhibit C. Those specifications are quality, so the methane content, the oxygen content, as well as the pressure at which the authority's existing blowers or gas compression equipment will deliver the gas to Ingenco at that point of acceptance. Excuse me. I mentioned that one of the reasons that Ingenco has, I think, expanded so well at throughout the Mid-East, the Mid-Atlantic, the Eastern Seaboard here, is the relatively lenient criteria they have for methane and oxygen of the landfill gas. So while landfill gas is produced at approximately 55% methane, the standard criteria here is 40%. And so this conforms well for the authority to continue to manage their well field at their discretion for objectives such as odor control. I did point out, I mentioned earlier, that if these gas specifications are not achieved, then the payment to the authority will reduce from 10% of gross revenues down to 3.5%. That's assessed on a daily basis. So it could come to pass that something, you know, abrupt and acute happens in a well field, and it, you know, a pipe is, you know, leaks or something, and it introduces a lot of oxygen. Obviously, that's detrimental to the engine gensets and production of power from that gas, but it could be fixed in a day or two, in which case that 3.5% would just be applied to those 2 days of the month. The 10% of gross revenues would be applied to other days. And again, that's assessed on a daily basis. And Article 5 is where the gas specifications are expressed in detail, and non-conforming gas reduces that. It does not diminish the minimum monthly payment. Articles 6 through 8 here talks a lot about the metering. Ingenco maintains the metering with the authority right to review or request any calibration tests. Talks about the permits. There is one provision: if there's actual air emission offset credits become necessary for Ingenco, the authority has agreed to supply those if their landfill produces those. Tom, I'm going to ask you here, that isn't currently a requirement for your other projects in Virginia, right?
Yeah, that's true, Bob. There is no requirement on any kind of air emissions, but they have brought that as part of the, the Virginia Clean Energy Act. So it's something that could be looked at, or could be. Usually they'll exempt small generators like us, but you never know. So that's just a CYA type of provision in there at this time.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, and so board members, one of the things that this contract and the negotiations attempted to do is be very forward thinking and address a lot of what if scenarios in all aspects of it. So the contract negotiations, I feel, were extensive in both sides, putting in provisions like this of a potential future condition that could develop, that I think is somewhat different than the Concord agreement from 21 years ago. And so a lot of the provisions, or certain provisions, not a lot, but some of them, if evaluated on the current circumstances, aren't even applicable, but this is one of those. The term is 20-year term. There's an option for 2 5-year renewal terms at the conclusion of that initial 20-year term, if both parties agree. And then there's rights to terminate. I think the authority has 7 different circumstances that enable the authority a right to terminate, and Ingenco has 5 or 6 in there. I don't go into great detail on those. And coming towards the end of it, the primary points in Articles 9 through 12 here are, 9 through 11 are taxes in Article 9, force majeure circumstances in 10. And then Article 11 talks about the seller obligations. Obviously, the first and foremost are to manage the gas system and the landfill that produces the gas. Another seller obligation to highlight is to provide notice when the flow that's being transferred to the authority, to Ingenco, is within 200 CFM of the power plant's capacity. Ingenco's initial plant will include 18 engines. That's a 6 megawatt power plant nameplate capacity, and we expect that to consume roughly 1,800 CFM, cubic feet per minute, of gas if that gas contains approximately 50% methane. Just for general reference, the landfill gas collection system is currently at about 1,100 to 1,200 CFM. So the initial plant will be underfueled and will not be able to produce 6 megawatts of power using landfill gas initially. So it's designed, and this whole partnership is arranged to anticipate growth of the gas supply for Ingenco's. And then also it talks about accepting up to 50 gallons per day of landfill gas to energy project condensate. In other words, the gas is condensed and moisture condenses out of the gas due to pressure and temperature changes at the authority's station. By transferring the gas to Ingenco to put in their engines, there's further temperature and pressure changes that will yield some additional moisture removal, and the authority has agreed to accept that back into their leachate collection system. And that's typical for most of Ingenco's projects. Ingenco, or purchasers' obligations, are to obviously not interfere with landfill operations. And then there's a provision for them to expand when there's greater than 300 CFM of excess gas, as long as the term has greater than 48 months remaining. And most importantly, if Ingenco deems that the economic circumstances warrant expansion. Otherwise, they'll pay a penalty of 50% of the excess landfill gas value. It's unlikely that those circumstances will all align, but there's some protection in there for the authority to not have landfill gas of substantial quantities being flared and thus deriving no revenue from that. Finally, there's also environmental matters, a number of provisions there on other environmental matters under Article 11. And the last Articles 12 through 16 address warranties. Your board packet summarized the security, $100,000 letter of credit that Ingenco has to maintain for the term of the agreement, and such exciting matters as insurance and miscellaneous provisions and Virginia legal provisions that go into all these type of contracts. I would be remiss if I didn't mention some last minute, I guess, subtle changes to particular wording that has occurred since the version 8 was inserted into your board package a week ago. I list here, some of the things the authority in reviewing, and Ingenco in reviewing the last minute subtle changes to specific language in the recitals, Article 1, Articles 3, 4, and 5, both parties agreed. That third bullet, the authority did request clarification that the applicability of the minimum payment be stipulated for the entire term of agreement. That was always the intent, but we felt like perhaps it didn't quite say it as clearly as it should have. Ingenco intended for that to be applicable during the entire term. There was a change in Article 7.1 about the number of business days to review permit applications. And then the authority agreed to accept some subtle language changes in Articles 11.1 and 11.3 that provide in Genco the sole determination of economic viability for future expansion of the initial power plant, if that even becomes applicable. Thank you so much for bearing with me in that long presentation, but I wanted to give you a very detailed summary because it's been an issue at the other landfill, and give you some sense of the extensive critical thinking that went into this contract language by Gary, Clark, Bill, myself, and Tom. Be happy to take anybody's questions. I guess I should definitely let Clark, Bill, Gary, or Tom make any corrections to anything I said or clarify anything as I presented it.
That was a great summary, Bob. I certainly appreciate it. This is Tom Fabry from Genco. I'm here to answer any questions as well. We're a Richmond-based landfill gas developer. As Bob said, we do have a different platform than most. We have very small engines, allows us to do a lot of different things, capture a lot of different value. So we feel pretty confident in our ability to succeed at this landfill. It's really well run. It's got a great gas collection system, a great flare system. So hats off to you guys for putting this thing together. And yeah, we're really excited about it here in Richmond.
This is Gary. I would note that Genco has a lot of sites already established in Virginia. They're well positioned at many municipal landfills throughout the state.
Thank you.
So if I may, a quick question. Thanks for the detailed presentation. I think it's bold to call it a summary. So gas extraction system, great. We pull the gas off the landfill. We generate some revenue off of it. That all sounds excellent. Can you talk to me? You know, we've used gas extraction to help mitigate odors in the community. Will this enhance that, change that, or anything? And is there any other impact on the neighbors? Is this going to be a noisy system? Is it going to be a smokestack? Is it going to generate additional truck traffic? So what is the nature of what my folks here in Campbell County will experience if this system's installed and operated?
Yeah, this is Tom Fabry from Genco again. I think, well, I would say that Genco prides itself on being as quiet and as uninterruptive as possible. We try to take the gas as it's collected, no matter how that is. Bob touched on a little bit. Most gas systems target a 50% methane. Our spec down there to 40% allows you guys to run your landfill how you run your landfill. We take it as is, where is, and do the best we can with what we got. We do put our engines inside a metal building. There is specific sheeting inside that building. It's sound attenuating. So it does a really good job of cutting down on noise. As far as truck traffic, we do have people going there, but we will have some deliveries of liquid fuel. I would say those will be in the neighborhood of once every 2 weeks. So, I mean, you wouldn't even notice it compared to the dozens of trash trucks that you coming in there every day. So that's kind of a broad summary, but we do try to, it is a partnership. So we do work with you guys. Things do happen. Nothing's perfect. And we have had things happen in the past where, either the way we get into the landfill or flare control issues, those types of things come up and we work through them. We have a good engineering team here. Everything from auto starting flares or lighting the flares ourselves if need be. If someone's not on site for the authority, then we could do that, take over that kind of responsibility. So there is a lot of things that you work out throughout time, but we are pretty comfortable with being around landfills and working with our partners on making a successful project.
Thank you.
just to reiterate, the authorities transferring the gas that would normally go to the flare, which destroys the malodorous components or constituents in the landfill gas, and will now have a T in the piping between the blowers and the flares. It already exists. The T's already there, and now it will convey to Ingenco's engine gen sets that are certainly appropriate and suitable for destroying those same malodorous constituents in the chambers of their internal combustion engines, their compression ignited internal combustion engines. And so we don't expect any increase in odors from the engine serving as the device that destroys the landfill gas versus the flare. Similarly, there's no expected changes to the quantity of gas that's being collected or uncollected from the landfill now. SCS has performed some sound pressure level measurements at power plants and found them to be always below OSHA standards on the outside. I will say, Frank, it is loud. If you go into their actual plant, you will be asked to wear hearing protection inside the building, as their operators do all the time. But outside, I wouldn't think that it would be anything more noticeable than or that is deemed inappropriate for an industrial facility.
All right, thank you. So just one other question, if I may. What would the benefits to the authority be? Are there any benefits to the authority over and above revenue? That's a significant benefit. I don't mean to short it, but I'm just curious, are there other benefits to the authority by implementing this partnership?
Well, I mean, I think from my standpoint as a environmental engineer, I think the public image and branding as a green environmental stewardship of an actual producer of green power and energy and recovery of the beneficial use is substantial from my standpoint for the authority. And there could potentially be other benefits. I know Tom has thought about, and Ingenco has considered, combined heat and power for, other treatment of or disposal of industrial wastewater that's generated at landfills. So there could be some other synergies that come out of this partnership. Those are the things that come to my mind.
Yeah, so this doesn't say anything about that.
Okay, thank you. Other questions for staff or our guests on this proposal? Looks like Mr. Carter.
So I don't recall from the previous submittals on this subject, but was the authority shown pro forma financials that showed Ingenco's operational expenses on an annual basis, potential gross revenues, et cetera, et cetera? How do we get to 10%?
The 10% was proposed by Ingenco in their proposal. The authority slid the proverbial envelope back across the table, angling for some increase in that. Ingenco counter offered and restructured the deal that was offered in the proposal to be variable. The authority considered that, did a net present value analysis of it. Ultimately, after about 2 or 3 versions of the envelope being slid across, recognized that Ingenco's offer was fair and equitable. And I have evaluated it on a per MMBTU basis based on some assumed gas quality and quantity projections, and found that it came to about just shy of 50 cents per MMBTU. I think it was maybe 46 cents per MMBTU, and assess that with some of the other historical contracts that I'm aware of in the industry. As we all know, electricity purchase and markets are not as lucrative for Ingenco or for landfills as they were in the 90s and 2000s. And so my advice and counsel to Clark and Gary was that this was a reasonable, fair, and equitable pricing scheme.
So just a follow-up, was the authorities team able to see potential profits of Ingenco as part of your review, or it's just an analysis that SCS did?
Yeah, we were not made privy to the actual margins that Ingenco potentially could be deriving. Their costs fluctuate with the amount of the diesel fuel component. Their engines, although they start up on diesel completely, they quickly ramp back, but they always maintain about 2% of the total BTU value is the diesel component. And so some of their potential profit margins would be dependent upon the fuel consumption and the price of number 2 fuel oil, and also the price of the renewable energy credits in the PJM wholesale market. Tom, I'm talking your business here. You can jump in anytime. But to answer Mr. Carter's question, we were not provided a full pro forma that detailed their expenses and or revenues and costs, partly because over the next 20 years, I'm not even sure Ingenco can define it except for approximations and estimations.
Yeah, I mean, we use power curves and rec curves, capacity curves that are provided by certain consultants, that type of thing. I can say that rec prices have gone up. That's the renewable energy credits since we bid this project are literally up probably $5 to $8 per megawatt hour. So we would be, feel very comfortable. As far as our financials, we are a private company. We don't give out a lot of profit margin type of information. It is a percentage of revenue type of deal. So 10% of revenue is quite a large chunk of any company's business. When we do have fixed costs. We have people there. We have, as Bob Dick noted, one of our big operating expenses is the diesel, just because on a per MMBTU basis, that's very expensive. But the other thing is we do have a very robust platform as far as being able to handle different qualities of gas and different quality as far as methane and oxygen and that type of thing. But we go through a lot of parts. Our by far biggest operating expense is changing, doing overhauls on engines and refurbishing engines. We go through a lot of turbos, go through a lot of heads and cylinders, that type of thing. So we keep a very big inventory going through there. So it is a big expense for us. So, and the worse the quality of the gas, the higher those expenses tend to be. But we're not going to be making $1 million. Well, total revenue is probably going to be in the 1 million to 1.5 million range starting out. So we do have quite a bit of costs, and you guys are going to be taking a good chunk of that margin anyway. So we're not a 50% margin business type of thing, or making money hand over fist. So we're more in the 25 to 30% range on margins, and you would take a cut of that, and a good cut of that, really.
So just in follow-up, without seeing that type of information from the company, which I understand they don't want to divulge their financials necessarily, and then based on whatever computations SCS did, there's still, from the authorities' perspective, a high level of confidence that 10% is fair.
I think so. I think there's a high degree of confidence from SCS as the authorities consultant, understanding the current circumstances surrounding, dispatchable power production using landfill gas, that 10% of gross revenues is fair.
I agree with that. We spent a lot of time going back and forth with Ingenco. And I believe the 10% is comparable to many of their other agreements in Virginia, if not a little bit better.
So if I may, another question. And I may, sorry, I've read through the agreement. So I can't say I've mastered it, that's for sure. But if I understood it correctly, if the company would be allowed to use other fuel sources in lieu of the landfill gas to continue its operations. And if that's correct, what other fuels would they use? Natural gas or what? I'm not sure I completely understood that.
Yeah, I'll touch on that. Our engines are dual fueled, so we can run 100% diesel. As Bob talked about, that gives us some benefit in very high power prices. If we're running, let's say we're running 3 megawatts on landfill gas based on the amount of gas flow, we could fire up the other 3 megawatts on 100% diesel and capture very high prices. And that's basically what that provision is there for, is to allow us to run on either 100% diesel or biodiesel, ethanol type of fuels.
Yeah.
So we do have a very robust platform, and it is dual fueled platform.
Yeah. So if I may, I sort of understood that to be sort of a just in case situation, and then again, I can't really speak specifically to my knowledge of the agreement, but if Ingenco does use alternate fuel sources, does that affect or not affect if they're not using any gas for whatever reason?
It's a 10%. Yeah, it's 10% of revenue. They'll get 10% of that revenue as well.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
We're not selling them the gas. We're sharing the revenue with them.
Oh yeah. No, Bob said that initially. Sorry. You guys are more familiar with the agreement than I am.
We spent a lot of time with it over the last couple of weeks. I can tell you that.
Yeah, I can tell from reviewing it.
Okay, other questions on the agreement, the draft?
I'm good.
All right. It looks like we've lost Susan off the call. So what are we actually doing here, guys? We're authorizing the execution of the agreement and a lease contingent upon land use approval and permitting?
That's correct.
Okay. So it's easy for me because the land use question goes to the Board of Supervisors, and if they don't want this in our community, they can deny the requested land use. Would be remiss if I didn't point out it will be an interesting discussion when the entity that withheld a couple $1 million in payment comes before the board seeking a special use to generate additional revenue. So I look forward to that conversation if and when it occurs. So Gaynell, Steve, what's your pleasure on this?
I'm a yes. Move it forward.
Well, I'm in favor of it, and maybe they should go get the special use permit. I don't know. That's a twisted comment,
Yeah, I think we've made clear that the whole thing's contingent on that, right? And I think I heard Tom express very clearly his understanding of that. So with that in mind, I'm in favor of it.
The contract's contingent on the special use permit.
Right.
Okay. Well, I'm in favor of it, Dan.
Okay, so I'll go along with that. Let's see if we can move it forward and see what happens.
Okay, great. I appreciate everybody's time. Looking forward to working with you guys.
Thank you. All right, next we got solar energy PPA, and it simply cannot take as long to discuss that. So hopefully we've got a little tighter presentation on that.
Sure. I just have a summary in the board packet. We received an unsolicited PPEA project proposal on December 16th. It's a utility scale 30 to 40 megawatt solar panel installation project on about 150 acres of land owned by the region. The company is flexible on where to place these panels, but they do include the permanently closed section of phase 3 of our landfill, and possibly portions of future unused portions of the Bennett property. The project proposes to enter into a 30-year lease to place these solar panels on the areas that we would agree upon. We own substantially many more acres of land at the site. They do say that we will, and we would also require a minimum of 100-foot buffer between the project and any adjacent properties. The project will provide enough power to supply about 5,000 homes a year. Private funds will be used for the development and construction of the project. If we do accept the project proposal, then our PPA guidelines would require that we seek proposals from other vendors to install solar equipment, similar type projects. We can also choose not to accept it with no ramifications to the authority. This proposal is really a question of whether we want to generate some income from the authority with a solar project. Accepting the proposal would just authorize our staff to move forward with negotiations with other offers after a advertisement period for a similar project on what they're willing to pay for lease agreements and what not for us placing solar panels on our property. Bill, do you want to add anything to that as far as the PPA goes?
No, the only question before the authority right now is whether to accept this proposal. And if you accept it, then we have to go get competing proposals. You obviously can still deny it at any point until you make a final decision.
I thought we already passed this by 2 times.
You did, but you never voted not to accept it.
What is the financial benefit?
That is yet to be determined through the competitive negotiation process. If we do accept it, we would receive other proposals from other companies that might be interested in similar projects. The Catherine Kling is here from the proposer. She may be able to answer some of those questions, but at this point, it's probably a little premature to determine any financial numbers because I understand that they also would need to do some more research and studies on exactly what land we would have available for a project such as this. Is that right, Catherine?
Yeah, I guess generally I could say it's in the range of tens of thousands of dollars, depending. It's usually lease rates are based on a per acre basis. And so I would say tens of thousands of dollars, depending on how many acres. And, we're talking about, I think the original proposal that was in the presentation I gave a month or two ago, was for 150 acres. So, that could be more than 50,000. It just depends. If you're going to do it on a competitive basis, I can't put my offer out in the public domain.
That's right.
Yeah, so as I understand it, this was an unsolicited proposal. We just need to formally decide, do we want to have this conversation or not? So if we decide we want to have the conversation, we invite others to the table and we can end the conversation at any point. But if we don't even want to have the conversation right now, we just need to formally say we're not accepting this proposal, return it to the offerer, and shut the door for now. And I do believe at any point in the future, if we wanted to revisit this, we could always put out a solicitation for PPEA proposals if we wanted to contemplate it in the future. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, gang, what do we think on this one?
Does it require special use permit as well?
Yes, sir.
Yep. I mean, I defer to Campbell County. I'm not sure.
Can we make that your standard position on these? On anything?
No,
on the
of
authority?
course, yeah.
I want the minutes to reflect that. Mr. Carter said he deferred to Campbell County.
On this PPEA.
Ah, yeah, the clarification. We don't do it verbatim, Steve.
Yeah.
Gaynell, what's your feeling? Can you speak about Lynchburg's position?
Yeah, Lynchburg position is, we would be fine with moving it forward just to see what we could get out of it. So we're fine with moving it forward.
Yeah, I'm not there. I think if we want to have this conversation, we ought to think it through and then invite the proposals. So I'm going to say let's defer on this for now.
Does that mean that you want to not vote to not accept
correct.
the proposal?
Correct.
Okay.
Require motion?
It does require a motion not to accept it. And Frank's right. You can issue a solicited PPA whenever you want to. And, you know, I will say that there are times when unsolicited PPAs, you know, are viewed as sort of, you don't get as much competition sometimes as with solicited ones, but that may or may not be the case here.
Does anybody want to make the motion that we decline at this point, or shall I?
Wait, so I have a question, Clark. I mean, sorry, I'm not Mr. Analysis myself necessarily, but have y'all done any analysis of what the financial benefit to the authority may be for this or another proposer?
Again, you know, that would come when we would actually receive proposals from for the next step. And then we would you know, those numbers would have some, you know, they're confidential information in them that would have revenue numbers in them for us to look at. But just
so there's no information out there that y'all would be able to glean from that would say, oh, if we did this, we might realize, the authority may realize X. We just have to wait to see.
Well, it's just I did ask Catherine, you know, the potential revenue, and she touched on that earlier. You know, roughly, you know, $500 or so an acre for a lease agreement. You know, that's pretty substantial for you know, land that really
I thought she said 10,000 per acre.
Well, per year, tens of thousands per year,
Okay.
depending on how many acres you lease. And
So, I mean, you know, that could be substantial, you know, revenue for, you know, especially, you know, the closed landfill where it's, you know, it's just not really being used for anything except just the closure cap. And there's these are very common projects in closed landfills across the country.
we've done a number of landfill projects. That's all we do is brownfields and landfills. So we could give you you know, some contacts if you're interested in talking to other municipalities that have operating projects on their landfills that we've built for them.
Is that persuasive for you, Mr. Carter?
I move to table until we receive additional information.
Gaynell, I presume you all are friendly to that?
Sure, if that would help it along, sure.
Okay, great. I'm always in favor of more information. So let's just, Mr. Carter, can you sort of shape up so we can give staff some clear expectations, what additional information you may want? Or do you want to give that some thought and just follow up?
Well, I move that the authority request additional information either from the proposer on similar projects and outcomes for the entity that leases the property to them, or whatever information they could provide that is persuasive to their proposal.
All right, thank you. Mr. Carter made that in the form of a motion. Gaynell, would you mind seconding that?
Second?
Okay, if there's no further discussion, all in favor say aye, or let's do it for anybody on the phone. Mr. Carter,
Yes.
Gaynell,
Yes.
and I'll vote yes.
I just want to caution against getting a lot of information from this proposer until you decide to have competing proposals. Getting the cart a little bit before the horse. But we certainly can get a list of what other landfills have these sorts of projects and see what kind of income they are getting from them.
Mhm. Yeah, I should have made the motion that way. So if that's a correction, I'm certainly in favor of that.
I think it's a clarification that we all sort of
Yep.
understood. And I would say more so than what money they're making off of them, I'd like some information about the nature of the impact of their project. And some context. We have some very, very close neighbors at this landfill. Not all landfills have that. So just a sense of how they've operated in close quarters with the larger community would be helpful, in addition to, the monetary questions that are very germane. Okay, so I think we got clarification, but I don't think we need to revisit the motion unless, anybody's dissatisfied with that. And then we can move on then to the director's report.
Thank you. First, the tonnage report, as we've touched on throughout the meeting, we have seen a continued increase in tonnage over last year. But if you look over the last 3 years, which are included in our bar charts, it somewhat equalizes over the last 3 years. So, but we'll take a good hard look at the trends, and I've got some resources with through SWANA as far as industry projections moving forward. So we'll take a good close look at that prior to our next meeting when we present the budget for approval. So anyway, last
Clark, if I may, before we move off tonnage, I think I'm getting the sense you're moving on. Just a quick question. Commercial tonnage. How are we doing specific to commercial tonnage? And for example, I'm sorry, Susan's not still on the call, the Appomattox transfer station, is there any update on that timeline? Have you guys done any projecting as to what impact that may have for us?
There's a lot of movement in the commercial world with county waste. I understand they're still moving forward with their plans to build a landfill, a large private landfill in Cumberland County. I do understand that project hasn't made a lot of progress in the last year or so, and it still could be many years off before they actually begin accepting waste. But that's all just hearsay information. I'm not so sure. I don't believe they've from information I've gathered, I don't believe they've actually submitted a site plan to the county. If Susan was here, she could definitely tell us that. But, I don't believe that the county waste has submitted the site plan to the county yet for that transfer station. So I'm not exactly sure where that project is. The Roanoke County landfill, Roanoke Regional Resource Roanoke Resource Authority has recently accepted proposals for additional tonnage coming into their Smith Gap landfill in Catawba. I looked at their minutes or their agenda for their last meeting. They had some information on that, so it is public. County Waste has proposed bringing in about 100,000 tons to that facility. It's just speculation of where all that tonnage is coming from, whether they're going to be pulling some tonnage from our area or not remains to be seen. We're not sure about that. That is something that I am keeping a very close eye on. I do know that they're making a lot of progress in Botetourt with that transfer station that they've proposed to build in Botetourt after taking over ownership of the Botetourt County landfill, which is very close to reaching capacity at this point. And their agreement with Botetourt was that the county waste would have all of the residential tonnage from that brought to these, what I understand, the Botetourt County Waste Convenience Centers, and that they would also take control of the landfill and close the landfill out there. And I believe they're pretty close to reaching capacity out there, so that they will be looking for another disposal site for that trash, whether it's Roanoke or some other site. I just don't know. So there's a lot of movement that I'm keeping a close eye on. Yeah, as far as the future with projections of tonnage, all I have now is based on past tonnage records.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, please proceed with your report.
Any more questions about tonnage?
No.
Odor report. I always bring an updated odor report to the board. In March, we've seen 5 odor complaints from 2 addresses. 3 of those complaints came yesterday and this morning. In February, we had three total complaints in the month of February from 2 addresses. Any questions about the odor report? That's all I have for odors.
I'm good. I don't see any other questions. Okay. Anything else as part of your report?
That's all I have.
Thank you. Next, we have the attorney's report. Bill?
The only thing is that the General Assembly had a bill before it to raise fees for landfills. And they ended up with a work group that is supposed to meet over the summer and fall to come back with a proposal for the General Assembly, which interestingly directs the work group to come up with a increase that will cover all the costs of permitting, enforcement, everything else. So they definitely want to raise the fees to cover all of their enforcement permitting activities. But it hasn't happened yet, and it's not going to happen until next General Assembly. So we have another year.
Okay. Who are the members of that work group? Have they been named?
They have not been named. Private landfills, public landfills, and some other folks. Obviously, DEQ is involved in it.
Okay. Anything else, Bill?
Nope.
Any questions for Mr. Hefty?
No.
Okay. All right. So we're down to other business. Anybody have anything else for the group today? Seeing none, hearing none. Looks like our next meeting is again an electronic meeting on April 28th at 2 o'clock. I suppose we'll revisit the budget then. And refresh my memory, I think we agreed on electronic meetings through April. Is that correct? Or is there another one after that?
Through April, that's correct.
Okay. All right, if there's no other business before the authority, let's take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right, that's a motion and a second and
Second.
unanimous support. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Thank you all very much. Hope you have a good afternoon.
You too. Bye-bye, everybody.
Oh, man.